Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and as always, welcome back to yet another video. Now with us still coming off the recent news of the definitive edition of Mortal Kombat 1, presumably marking a conclusive end to the life cycle of this game, it does now naturally stir up the discussion of what is next for Netherrealm Studios. Are we going to follow the trend of releasing yet another Mortal Kombat game? Will it revert back to its previous annual cycle with Injustice? Or what about even the possibilities of spin-off games and remakes? That is what we will be exploring in depth in today's video, covering the strongest to the weakest possibilities. But right out the gates, I do want to say thank you for the support on the most recent video. I didn't quite expect it to get the reception it has, but I really do appreciate the support as well as your engagement and thoughts, especially since I do largely suspect YouTube has effectively blacklisted and shadow banned the channel. So again, really appreciate the support on your end. Anyway, let's start at the very top here with the most likely option, Mortal Kombat 13. And this seems to be a very interesting decision as choices go. While it's not the strongest contender here, as we will be getting to that next, it's a pretty strong choice all things considered, and it does make sense up to a certain extent, because Mortal Kombat 11 and 1 is the first time in Netherrealm's history that we have gotten two MK games released back to back. And over on the business side of things during conference calls with investors, David Zaslav, Warner Bros. Discovery CEO, has basically stated that Mortal Kombat would be one of the series that they would be taking a focus on. Something clearly reflected in the back-to-back installments. And if we look at the numbers, Mortal Kombat have always typically outsold their Injustice counterhalves. So it's the best choice, right? Well, not entirely. I think it's pretty safe to say and very evident that the release of two MKs back-to-back has greatly affected the quality of what we expect from an NRS game. Because typically with these games, one of its biggest selling points is just how rich in content it is. Regardless about how you feel about each installment and how they play, there's always been a certain amount of prestige that comes with these games in terms of their offline content. Something that's undeniably noticeably absent with this installment, being released with a lack of quality we're all kind of familiar with these games. Whilst it did release with a story mode, ladders, and new modes such as invasions, for strictly PvE players, there was nothing to do once you completed that season. Nothing that really supplemented that gameplay loop until a year later with the Towers of Time, something that's typically included in these games on release. And even on the player vs player side of things, the game has been absent of rooms and lobbies and an online practice mode since release. Whilst this may not be a big deal to many of you, for the social aspect and element that these games were known for, it's kind of a far cry of what we once had. Now it's undeniable that the game does play well at its core system and does look very pretty. That can't be taken away from it. But throughout MK1's lifespan, this feels like a game and a team that is suffering from creative exhaustion, not being given enough time to add the polish MKs are known for, and most importantly in my mind, simply not being given enough time to wind down and creatively tackle things from a different and new perspective. I really do think that they're suffering from fatigue, because keep in mind that technically once a NRS game does release, they immediately set off to work on the next big installment, meaning that they've strictly only been working on MKs since 2017. That's 8 years on one singular franchise from an, all things considered, considerably small team. And it's never been more evident or reflective to me in the quality of the game, as the cracks are starting to show. Hell, I actually think it's reflected in the gameplay. Now, I'm probably gonna catch some heat for saying this, considering just how damn many of them there are. I really do think that the guests of MK1 stand hand over heels in terms of creative quality. They play incredibly well in the sense that they are faithful to their source material. And I do feel like the fact the team don't feel like they have to be shackled to just making MK characters is what allows those guests to have so much flair. I really do think it's reflective of the creative exhaustion I've talked about. How many times can you reinvent the same wheel before it feels like you're burning both ends of the candle? That's definitely my own take here, but I really do feel that in the sense of quality from the DLC MK characters to that of the guest characters. Along with this, if I'm honest mind you, I am exhausted with this franchise currently. Whilst the frequency of MK content is appreciated, with the animated movies and the live action stuff in mind, a lot of that content is more often than not kind of mediocre. And because we're getting it on such a frequent basis, and not at a quality that blows our minds, I feel like it's tainted the overall quality of how we perceive MK. The way I put it is like this. Do you love pizzas? Do you love burgers? They're awesome, right? Love them. But if you keep having it so often and on a frequent basis, it does start to lose its luster, doesn't it? That is what I think we're seeing now. The increased saturation of Mortal Kombat media that is only at an okay quality has made the release of anything with that title on it feel meh. Because prior to this, whenever there was an MK or whenever there was some news coming out about it, you knew that you would expect quite a bit of quality behind it. But with the endless stream of content that we do have right now, it not only feels like we're drowning in the amount of stuff there is, but it's simply not meeting our expectations. And it's also a clear sign that the NRS cycle did work. Not so much the time in between, but the fact that we all knew that the dedicated time would result in the release of something special. The time in between actually allowed us to cleanse our palate for the next installment. That is the issue I think we're all seeing and feeling right now, and it's evidently showing in the quality of their games. So I do think some time is needed for NRS to sit back, watch, analyze, study, and then cook for their next game. Whilst I don't think MK1 is entirely a terrible product, what it has to offer with its price tag and its microtransactions and weak modes have really tainted what people expect from a Mortal Kombat. So maybe some time away will not only allow those issues to be ironed out, kind of give us all the time we need to move on from those issues. Time makes the heart grow fonder. So of all of the options here, whilst I think a sequel would be a logical and financially smart choice, I think for the health of the studio, it'd be better to have some time away. Especially if the rumors of Chaos Reign selling poorly are indeed true. As again, it could yet be another sign. So this expectedly now takes us onto our next and most likely option in my opinion, Injustice 3. Now whilst the DC game side of things haven't been doing so hot, especially with the Suicide game bombing, and the unbelievably unfortunate demise of Monolith's Wonder Woman game, I do actually think Injustice 3 is fairly high. Why? Well, I believe that beyond the sales figures of their games, the somewhat relaunch of the DC brand through James Gunn's Superman is a sign that there is indeed a change for the brand. Not only ushering a new age for DC movies, but also, as far as I'm aware, the gaming department. So naturally, I do think the time is now to actually talk about the possibility of another Injustice. And I'm gonna have to be real with you. If you told me that we'd be having this conversation a few years back, I probably would have wanted to roll in a bathtub of razors. But I think enough of a sufficient time has passed for me to say, sure, let's reapproach Injustice. However, I will try to be as clear and polite of this as possible. If we are to have another Injustice, we absolutely need to step away from some of the dumb shit that made Injustice a third-person shooter experience. Whilst I think the game's combo system is fun, and the character traits, interactions, transitions, and clashes were fantastic, we really need to talk about how to improve the player experience from the gameplay side of things. Because the Fallout mechanic, meter burn roll, and unfathomably large stages were and are a huge problem for that game, as such mechanics like that really incentivize zoning. It was a real problem throughout the game's lifespan, and whilst admittedly not the biggest issue at the highest of highest levels, it was still very prominent, and on the lower end side of things, it was an absolute noob stomper, which inherently is pretty bad considering the ease of use zoners have had in NRS games. Whilst I think a block button could inherently fix that on more of a casual level, as an overall package, those elements of Injustice seriously need to be reworked, allowing players to feel less eclipsed by that skill gap, while still allowing the game to thrive and be creative at a high level. Honestly, the mechanics for Injustice 1 were pretty sound, minus the unblockable interactables. If anything, it was the new mechanics introduced in Injustice 2, which really made it a chore to play. So in my mind, whilst I'd be down for an Injustice 3, I think they would have to radically change it mechanically. Retain some of its legacy elements and its gameplay, but rework its mechanics and rework those stages, because they are simply way too large. As for story, that's honestly pretty hard to say. Injustice 2 wraps up with a really nice bow that does more or less work as a perfect ending. And with Injustice's evil Superman having been kind of concluded in a spin-off comic, that's being Injustice versus the Masters of the Universe, we know that they would have to lean into a Batman ending. But for what direction it goes in, that's honestly super hard to say, because at this point you have to kind of introduce a big cosmic figure that really does impose an actual threat. And the problem is that by doing that, you then have to find a way to set up Superman to bring him back into the fold, which dangerously treads on similar plot elements from Injustice 2. And here's also another thing, right? I really don't think you can do a redemption story with this particular Superman. Child murder will do that to you. The only workaround would be to pass over the mantle to someone else. Like Connor Kent, that could work. But then you kind of need to justify Superman battling Batman again at some point in time. So one of the strongest options here is a soft reboot. And after MK11 and MK1, I don't want Netherrealm to do any more reboots. Honestly, I think one of the best options they could do is follow the continuity set forth from the first Injustice game, from the Justice League that was taken to that timeline. I feel like that's kind of the only way to make it work, without interfering with 1, the continuity, and 2, making things maybe a little bit too convoluted in that regard. I mean, hell, if they really wanted to, they could effectively make a prequel game as Injustice 0 was a thing. Plus, you gotta keep in mind with the options and approach here, and with the release of Superman this summer, they really need to consider the idea of doing a whole evil Superman again, especially with how oversaturated that archetype is in modern day media. Now, I know some might say, why make more? And good question, why make more? Easy, money. What more of a reason do you think these companies need? I'm just laying out the best options to justify those means. Plus, I mean, hey man, it's comics. It's incredibly rare that a story knows when to end itself. So this now takes us onto our next option here, and this is admittedly one that has surprised me and caught me off guard a little bit. Mortal Kombat vs DC2. And this sort of game and crossover does kind of encompass everything I've touched on before. And truth be told, I'm gonna be very real with a lot of you here. This isn't really new news to me, because this is actually stuff that I've heard previously behind the curtain. You see, throughout the grapevine of what I've heard over the years, whenever they've discussed their next big installments, MKvsDC has always been one of those ideas sat on the table, but one that naturally has never taken priority over their other games. Now though, with the resurgence of interest in DC, and somewhat conflicted community reception of MK1, I do see something like this being the best middle ground to actually pick up some steam. But as an MK fan, is this something I want to see? Kind of. You see, that MK fatigue is really set in. I can only speak on my behalf, but I do think a crossover would make it all that much more digestible. My only real problem and worry though is just how do you make such a thing possible? How does such an event take place? Well, I do have some ideas. One that I straight up don't want to see, but is the most likely go-to option, and the second is one that I'd love to see. So option 1, and this is the very easy and lazy choice, you do something with the Hourglass of Time. With that damn thing existing and playing such an important role in things, it's just like the easy go-to button to make crossovers and multiverse stuff a thing. And in my opinion, is the poorest choice of the two, because we really need to stray away from that multiverse junk. The other option I do have, and I will say I do much prefer this approach, and one that is quite unique, is have it be an Elseworld story, where both the MK and DC universe exist on the same plane, and are then thrust into the Mortal Kombat tournament. So the Earthrealm Defenders are a mix of the MK cast and members of the Justice League. But just to preface, before the league is created, it just helps create more interesting character interactions and dynamics, and could result ultimately at the end of the game where the league is formed. By doing this, it allows the story to start off with outward conflict and desire to invade Earthrealm, whilst introducing our characters. It then could result in the invasion, kind of filling in the comic book quota of big DC invasion, while simultaneously making it feel like a retelling of the events of Mortal Kombat 1 to 3. But if you really want to feed into that big crazy DC side of things, on the Special Forces front building up into the invasion, you could have Darkseid effectively looking to hunt the anti-life equation, taking him down to Earthrealm Netherrealm during the siege, creating a three-way war between these factions here. So effectively, to sum it up, you get a completely different and unique approach of a retelling from Mortal Kombat 1 to 3, whilst also keeping your DC characters on the front line and as good guys. It just now has the benefit of it just feeling very MK in nature. And honestly, I'd be pretty down for something like this, especially over an Elseworld story. Plus, magic is one of those things that can ground characters like Superman and Wonder Woman. I know some might be worried about the whole fatalities thing, but considering what they did to the Justice League in that Suicide Squad game, I don't think we have to worry about that issue anymore. As for how the game could work mechanically, honestly, just hybridize the system of Injustice 2 and MKX. Keep the explosive, short but sweet combo system of X, make it a 4-button fighter, but give everyone universal traits across the board. You could then just simply reintegrate stage transitions and interactions similar to that of Injustice 2, as well as the 3D era of MKs. You know, where that system derives from. Now, naturally, during the discourse of this game, a very common thing that I see people wanting is a remake of the 3D trilogy. And admittedly, whilst I think we are long overdue, especially in the current age of lost media, I really don't see this happening anytime soon, because this is something we've asked for so long and still haven't gotten now, despite the fact that we know there has been talks about it. Lord knows that I hope I'm wrong, but unless those games are outsourced to another studio, I do not see NRS tackling remaking older games, especially when they could be making newer ones. And this is coming from me of all people. I don't hold that nostalgia for the 3D era of games of Mortal Kombat, but I do think those fans are long overdue for some love, as they have been left on the shelf for a long amount of time. So this now takes us on to spin-off games. And man, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to break some hearts here for you all, especially you Shaolin Monk 2 fans out there, but in WB's current state, I do have some unfortunate insider news to say that won't be happening. Now, to clarify why that's the case, is because whatever members remained of the Shaolin Monks 2 team would actually be put on the mobile division of NRS. And as we know, since the failure and liquidation of Mortal Kombat Onslaught, that entire part of the team has been let go. So whatever creative ideas envisioned by that team are now just simply gone. Will such an idea ever be picked up in the future? Possibly, but as of right now, I don't see that being likely. The only way I could ever see such projects being greenlit is if Warner Brothers does recover, or if it's put in a mainline installment. And let's be realistic, I don't see that happening anytime soon. So with that said everyone, that kind of covers my overall thoughts and feelings of the options that Netherrealm has to work with right now. And honestly, there's quite a few different avenues they could go down, but I do think that the main big three safe picks would be MK, Injustice, or even a crossover. In terms of what I see them doing to maximize profit, I do think MKvsDC2 is the most likely pick. If not, then I definitely see Injustice being a strong contender, purely from the fact that they're putting so many of their eggs in the DC basket right now. Personally, for me, if I were to pick any of the choices here, I'm going to be selfish here and say that I wouldn't mind for that crossover, but only strictly if it followed what I said about it being an Elseworld game that follows what I laid out here. Let it be unique, but set in the foundation of the Mortal Kombat tournament. That's awesome, and you can take what works from both continuities with none of the baggage that weighs down either side. I'd be so down for that to work. But hey, that's just some of my ideas and my own fan fiction of how I'd like to see things go. So with that said and all of the options I've covered here, what do you think is next for Netherrealm Studios? Do you think we're getting another MK? Do you think we're getting another Injustice? Would you like to see another crossover? Please do comment down below, and please tell me how you like to see those games be played out. Because going off my previous video, a lot of you guys have opinions about what direction that Netherrealm should be going in, especially with how it handles its story and narrative. So please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say. But anyway everyone, that's it for me. I'll catch you in the next one.